Have you ever wondered what happens when a queen walks away from power to wash the feet of the poor? What if the most powerful woman in a kingdom used her crown not to rule, but to reconcile enemies, heal the sick, and stop a war with nothing but her presence? She hid bread in her cloak, and God turned it into roses. This isn't a legend. This is the story of Saint Elizabeth of Portugal. Chapter 1. A Saint is Born. Elizabeth was born in 1271 in Zaragoza, in the Kingdom of Aragon. From the moment of her birth, she belonged to two legacies, the royal house of Aragon and a heritage of deep Catholic faith. Her father, King Peter III, ruled with strength and ambition, but her mother, Queen Constance, nurtured a quiet devotion in their daughter. The court around her was filled with political intrigue and elegance, yet little Elizabeth was drawn more to the chapel than to the throne room. She was named after her great-aunt, Saint Elizabeth of Hungary, a woman renowned for her charity and holiness. The choice of name was more than a gesture, it was almost prophetic. From her earliest years, the young princess seemed to follow in her namesake's footsteps. Family and clergy alike noticed her thoughtful spirit, her gentle manners, and her unusual seriousness when it came to prayer and virtue. While most children her age were absorbed in games and play, Elizabeth showed a clear love for prayer and quiet reflection. She would often rise early to attend Mass, kneel silently in the chapel, and offer small sacrifices during Lent. She also practiced acts of mercy, giving food to the poor, comforting servants in distress, and offering her belongings to those in need. Her kindness was not for show, it came from a heart already attuned to God. Her religious education was taken seriously. She was taught by wise priests and devout women, learning the catechism, Latin prayers, and stories of the saints. But more than memorizing, she understood. Elizabeth spoke about Jesus with the familiarity of a child who truly believed in his presence. Her teachers were astonished by her sincerity and her hunger for holiness. In the royal court, everyone admired the young princess. She was graceful but never proud, intelligent but always humble. Her calm spirit seemed to bring peace to those around her. Some courtiers said she had an aura of serenity that softened even the most hardened nobles. To be in her presence was to be reminded of something higher, something sacred. Though still young, Elizabeth seemed destined for something more than politics and power. She never resisted her royal duties, but she carried them out with a spiritual depth far beyond her years. Her heart belonged to God first, and that silent offering would shape every step of her life. She was not called to flee the world, but to sanctify it from within. Even before she knew the weight of crowns or the pain of sacrifice, Elizabeth was already a living prayer. In her, God was planting the seeds of sainthood. Her holiness was not loud or dramatic, it was tender, steady, and rooted in love. And so, before she ever ruled a kingdom, she had already begun to reign in hearts. Chapter 2. A Royal Marriage. At the age of 12, Elizabeth of Aragon entered into marriage with King Denis of Portugal. Though still a child, she accepted her new role with quiet strength and grace. The marriage was arranged as a political alliance, uniting two powerful kingdoms. But for Elizabeth, it became a personal mission, a call to serve, to love, and to remain faithful to God in the heart of royal life. She left her home and family behind, stepping into the unknown with a courage far beyond her years. The court of Portugal was grand and complex. As queen, Elizabeth was immediately surrounded by wealth, noble expectations, and constant attention. Yet behind the splendor lay a world of temptation, gossip, vanity, ambition, and political intrigue. Elizabeth quickly learned that being queen was not just an honor, but a test. Still so young, she faced the pressure of court life and the scrutiny of nobles, but she clung to her values with determination. Her soul remained anchored in prayer. Amid royal banquets and public ceremonies, Elizabeth never abandoned her inner devotion. She began each day with Mass, offered silent prayers throughout the day, and practiced regular fasting. She gave generously to the poor, often slipping away from the palace to visit the sick and needy. Her dignity was quiet, her faith steady. Even in her finest royal garments, she remained deeply aware of Christ's presence and her duty to reflect his love in all she did. King Denis, her husband, was a capable and intelligent ruler. He advanced Portuguese agriculture, law, and education. But in his personal life, he lived with little discipline. He was known for his unfaithfulness, fathering several illegitimate children and entertaining mistresses. For Elizabeth, this was a heavy burden. She suffered in silence, never speaking publicly about her pain. Instead, she turned to God, offering every wound as a sacrifice of love. Throughout the challenges of marriage, Elizabeth never gave in to bitterness. She remained loyal and prayerful, interceding daily for her husband's soul. She did not argue or condemn. She simply loved with quiet strength. Her mercy was not weakness, it was holiness. In private prayer, she surrendered her suffering to God, trusting that grace could do what words could not. Slowly, her constancy began to soften the heart of the king. Her presence at court became a source of inspiration. While others competed for favor or power, Elizabeth offered peace. She encouraged other women to live modestly and serve the poor. Her gentleness calmed tensions, and her virtue changed the atmosphere. Though young, she was seen as a spiritual mother, a queen not only of a nation but of hearts. Elizabeth's marriage was not a fairy tale. It was a path of sacrifice, humility, and unwavering love. Yet, it was within that very hardship that her holiness grew strong. By remaining faithful in suffering, she showed that even in a royal palace, one could walk the narrow path of sainthood step by step, prayer by prayer. Chapter 3. Queen of Charity. As Queen of Portugal, Elizabeth saw her role not merely as one of prestige, but as a sacred duty to serve the poor and forgotten. With deep compassion, she founded hospitals for the sick, orphanages for abandoned children, and shelters for the elderly and homeless. These were not just institutions, they were places of mercy and dignity. Her reign was marked not by power alone, but by a tireless devotion to lifting others from sorrow and need. Her commitment to the poor was deeply personal. Elizabeth did not limit her charity to palace donations or royal decrees. She personally distributed food to the hungry and comforted those who were ill. On many occasions, she would step away from courtly events to visit the sick in hospitals she had founded. Her gentle voice, healing touch, and sincere concern brought hope to the forgotten. Though crowned in gold, her heart was wrapped in mercy. In the quiet of night, Elizabeth's charity took on an even more humble form. Disguised in simple clothing, she would slip out of the palace to walk the streets and alleyways. Carrying bread and small coins, she visited poor families in secret, offering not just material help, but human dignity. Her presence was often unrecognized, yet unforgettable. For many, she was like an angel arriving quietly, giving generously, and disappearing into the darkness before dawn. Elizabeth also extended her generosity to the church, especially to religious communities that lived among the poor. She became a patron of the Franciscans and Dominicans, whose ideals of poverty and service aligned with her own. She financed the construction of monasteries, supported their missions, and listened to their spiritual counsel. Through her partnership with these orders, the Queen's charity reached even the most remote corners of the kingdom. Under her influence, charity became a movement. Inspired by her example, members of the court began to give more freely. Noble women followed her lead, creating their own projects to care for widows and children. Even among commoners, her witness sparked new compassion. Elizabeth didn't just help the poor, she taught others how to love them. The spirit of Christian charity she ignited began to transform the nation. She used her personal wealth to serve those in need. Rather than adorn herself with jewels or throw lavish celebrations, she gave away royal gifts and portions of her fortune to families facing hunger, illness, or loss. Her generosity knew no limits. What others saw as treasure, she saw as tools to heal broken lives. She held nothing back, believing that all she had belonged to God. In time, the people began to call her the Mother of the Poor. She was not just a queen in title, but a mother in spirit, a comforter of the dying, a protector of orphans, a friend to the forgotten. Through every act of mercy, Elizabeth lived the gospel. Her charity was not a duty, but a way of life, a reflection of divine love shining from a royal heart. Chapter 4. A Peacemaker in the Palace. As time went on, a growing rift emerged between King Denis and his son, Prince Afonso. What began as tension over authority escalated into a bitter power struggle. Denis's pride clashed with Afonso's ambition, turning affection into hostility. The royal court divided into rival camps, and fears of civil war spread. Caught between duty to her husband and devotion to her son, Queen Elizabeth stood at the heart of the conflict, burdened by sorrow and the call to bring peace. Elizabeth suffered deeply in silence. Watching the two men she loved most at odds with one another brought anguish to her soul. She knew she could not take sides without worsening the conflict, yet she could not remain idle. As both wife and mother, she felt the weight of responsibility. In her heart, she carried the pain of a divided family and a kingdom on the brink of chaos. Her prayer became her refuge, and in prayer, she found the wisdom to act. She approached the situation not with force, but with gentleness. Elizabeth spoke to the king in private, urging him to soften his heart and consider reconciliation. She reminded him of his duties not only as a monarch, but as a father. With Prince Afonso, she appealed to his conscience, encouraging patience and respect. Her words were not commands, they were expressions of maternal love. Her presence, calm and steady, was like a balm to wounded pride. Beyond the royal family, Elizabeth extended her peacemaking efforts to the broader court. Disputes between nobles, rivalries among military commanders, and jealousies within the aristocracy were all drawn into the vortex of royal conflict. Elizabeth moved quietly but deliberately between parties, offering wise counsel, mediating in secret, and praying constantly for unity. Where others saw sides to take, she saw hearts to heal. Her methods were simple but powerful. A kind word here, a thoughtful gesture there. She sent messages of reconciliation, offered to host private conversations, and often stood as a silent, gentle witness during difficult meetings. Her compassion disarmed anger, and her wisdom earned trust. The mere sight of her entering a tense room brought hope. In many ways, her peacekeeping was not just political, it was profoundly spiritual. Over time, her efforts bore fruit. Skirmishes were avoided, relationships mended, and decisions softened. The king's heart gradually opened, and Afonso's passion was tempered. While tensions never disappeared entirely, open war was prevented. The people of Portugal saw clearly who had kept the realm from falling apart. In the eyes of both nobles and commoners, Elizabeth was not only a queen, but a pillar of peace. Her legacy as a peacemaker became legendary. Though she never raised a sword or gave an order of command, she won battles with patience, humility, and prayer. The people began to call her the Queen of Peace, a title she never claimed, but one she fully lived. In a time of division, she proved that love is the strongest path to unity. Chapter 5. Miracles and the Bread of Roses. One cold morning, Queen Elizabeth quietly left the palace with her cloak wrapped tightly around her. Hidden beneath it were loaves of bread meant for the poor. She often gave food to those in need, doing so discreetly, without fanfare. But on this day, King Denis caught sight of her. Curious and suspicious, he asked what she was hiding. Elizabeth, calm and composed, replied gently, "Roses, my lord." It was the middle of winter. Roses were impossible. The king, doubting her answer, demanded she reveal what was under her cloak. Without hesitation, Elizabeth opened it. To his astonishment, instead of bread, there appeared a cascade of fresh roses, vibrant, fragrant, and in full bloom. Shocked into silence, Denis could only stare. The miracle was undeniable. In that single moment, something divine had broken into the ordinary. The loaves she had hidden in secret had become a visible sign of heaven's grace. This miracle became one of the most beloved stories about Elizabeth. It revealed not only her generous heart, but also God's approval of her charity. For years, she had quietly served the poor, never seeking recognition. Now, in the face of suspicion, God himself had answered for her. The roses were more than flowers. They were symbols of pure love, sacrifice, and divine favor. Through them, Elizabeth's hidden holiness was brought into the light. The miracle of the roses was only one among many associated with her. People began to speak of other events. Sick children recovering after her prayers, families receiving unexpected help in times of crisis, travelers being protected from danger after seeking her intercession. Though Elizabeth never claimed to perform miracles, those around her believed her closeness to God brought peace and healing wherever she went. These stories spread quickly, and the people's affection for her deepened. She was no longer just their queen, she was their comfort, their protector, and, in many eyes, already a saint. The poor called her their mother. The suffering turned to her for hope. Even those who once doubted her began to believe that God truly worked through her. Her faith, lived so quietly, had become a beacon for the entire kingdom. Elizabeth became a living example of God's mercy. Her miracles were not dramatic displays of power, but gentle reminders of divine presence in daily life. She never sought attention. Her actions flowed from love, and the miracles that followed were seen as God's response to her faith. Through her, people saw that holiness was possible not just in convents or churches, but also in palaces, kitchens, and crowded city streets. In every hidden act of kindness and every answered prayer, Elizabeth reminded the world that grace can touch the most ordinary things. Bread became roses, suffering became healing. Through her, miracles became not spectacles, but signs of God's quiet, steady love. And so, Queen Elizabeth came to be known not only as a queen of charity, but as a woman through whom heaven smiled gently upon the earth. Chapter 6. The King's Final Days. As the years passed, King Denis of Portugal began to feel the weight of age and illness. Once a strong and commanding ruler, his body grew frail and his health declined steadily. The king, who had once commanded armies and shaped a nation, now spent his days confined to his chambers. The palace, once filled with the bustle of state affairs, quieted around him. At his side, faithful and constant, was Queen Elizabeth, his wife, his healer, and, in the end, his spiritual companion. Though their marriage had known sorrow, marked by betrayal and long periods of distance, Elizabeth never let resentment grow in her heart. As Denis's strength faded, she stayed by him with tender devotion. She fed him, wiped his brow, and offered comforting words during his pain. Others might have stepped back or left the care to servants, but Elizabeth saw this as her sacred duty. She had loved him, forgiven him, and now she would walk with him toward his final breath. More than care for his body, Elizabeth was concerned for the state of his soul. She spoke to him gently, reminding him of God's mercy and the importance of repentance. With compassion, she encouraged him to receive the sacrament of reconciliation and to confess his sins sincerely. In time, Denis, moved by her patience, and the example of her faith opened his heart. He received the last sacraments with humility, preparing to meet the Lord with a cleansed soul and a quiet heart. One final reconciliation remained. For many years, Denis had been estranged from their son, Prince Afonso, due to political conflict. Elizabeth, who had long worked to heal their rift, saw her chance at last. She invited Afonso to visit his father. In a deeply emotional moment, father and son embraced, exchanged forgiveness, and restored the bond once broken. It was a healing-only love, and Elizabeth's tireless prayers could have made possible. Soon after, King Denis passed away peacefully, surrounded by family and in a state of grace. He died not as a proud monarch, but as a forgiven soul, made ready by the hand and heart of the woman who had loved him faithfully to the end. His death was not marked by fear or regret, but by the gentle calm that comes from reconciliation with God and with others. Elizabeth mourned deeply, wearing the garments of widowhood and withdrawing from public life. She no longer attended court or involved herself in political matters. Her time as queen had ended, and now she turned her eyes toward heaven. Yet even in her mourning, she carried a quiet peace, the peace of knowing that Denis had died reconciled, and that her life's mission had entered a new chapter. From that moment forward, Elizabeth gave herself fully to God. Her palace became a place of prayer. Her heart, once divided between crown and cross, now belonged wholly to Christ. In serving her husband to the very end, she had fulfilled her vows, and in letting go, she stepped more deeply into her calling as a servant of divine love. Chapter 7. The Widow in Prayer. After King Denis's death, Elizabeth made a quiet but profound decision. She left the royal court behind and moved to a modest convent belonging to the Third Order of St. Francis. Though still a queen by title, she chose to live not in comfort, but in simplicity. The same woman who once walked through palace halls now entered cloisters of silence. It was not retirement, but a deeper vocation. Her widowhood became a gateway into total surrender to God. In the convent, Elizabeth embraced a life of humility and spiritual discipline. She fasted regularly, wore plain garments, and spent much of her time in prayer. The rituals of royal life were replaced by quiet devotions, spiritual readings, and contemplation. She no longer lived by the rhythms of court, but by the liturgy of the hours. In this new life, she found peace not in power, but in the presence of Christ. Her charity did not cease when she left the palace. If anything, it deepened. Elizabeth did her own laundry, cleaned her room, and served the poor with her own hands. She cared for the sick and elderly, offered food to beggars, and spoke gently to all who sought help. She refused any special treatment. Her royalty now expressed itself in service. She had become, in every way, the humble handmaid of the Lord. Though she had stepped away from public life, her reputation for holiness only grew. People still came to her for counsel, and kings still sent messages seeking her prayers. Elizabeth never sought attention, but her presence brought comfort to many. Her wisdom was trusted, her peace admired. She no longer ruled a kingdom, but her influence remained through quiet love and spiritual insight. Elizabeth also remained a faithful student of the faith. She opened her heart to the spiritual direction of holy priests and friars. Though revered by many, she constantly sought to grow in humility. She confessed regularly, asked for guidance, and prayed to be made ever more faithful. Her path was not one of self-praise, but of surrender. She desired not praise, but purity of heart. Her way of life became an example for others, especially for women seeking holiness in the world. Elizabeth showed that one could live a contemplative life even outside monastery walls. Her prayers gave strength, and her silent sacrifices inspired many. She reminded people that greatness is not found in power, but in loving God through daily acts of mercy and devotion. As the years passed, her holiness seemed to shine more clearly. The more she withdrew from titles and honors, the more people saw Christ in her. She had once been a queen of a nation, now she was a queen of hearts. In her quiet convent life, Elizabeth radiated the joy of someone who had found the pearl of great price, God himself. Chapter 8. The Queen of Peace returns. In the year 1336, Portugal once again stood on the brink of war. A fierce conflict had erupted between Elizabeth's son, King Afonso IV of Portugal, and the King of Castile. The two realms, long entangled in political tensions, were now preparing for battle. Armies gathered, swords were sharpened, and the cries of war echoed across the land. Elizabeth, now elderly and frail, had long withdrawn from royal life. Yet when she heard of the impending bloodshed, her heart stirred with urgency. Despite her age and declining health, Elizabeth knew she could not remain silent. She had spent her life as a servant of peace, and this moment called her back into action. Though no longer queen in power, she remained a mother to her people and to her son. She believed firmly that war between Christian nations was a tragedy that must be avoided. With unwavering courage, she rose from her quiet convent life and prepared to intervene one final time. She set out for Estremoz, where the armies were preparing to clash. The journey was long and difficult, especially for a woman in her 60s, weakened by years of fasting and sacrifice. But Elizabeth pressed on, fueled by love and prayer. Clothed in simplicity, riding slowly through dust and heat, she made her way toward danger not with weapons, but with words, faith, and the weight of her moral authority. Upon arrival, she requested audiences with both sides. She met with generals, nobles, and even her own son. Speaking with clarity and conviction, she appealed to reason, to family, and to faith. She reminded them of their shared heritage, their duties before God, and the innocent lives at stake. Her voice was not forceful, but firm. Her presence carried the power of a woman who had lived for peace and had the scars to prove it. Miraculously, her words took root. Pride gave way to reflection, and tempers began to cool. Negotiations opened, and hostilities were suspended. What could have been a devastating war was avoided. Elizabeth had done what swords could not. She had disarmed hearts. Those who witnessed it never forgot the sight. An aged widow, fragile in body but unshakable in spirit, standing between two armies and turning them toward peace. This final act of courage sealed Elizabeth's legacy. Throughout her life, she had been a voice of reconciliation, a bridge between enemies, and a mother to the suffering. But this last intervention became her crowning moment, the perfect embodiment of her title as the Queen of Peace. Even the hardest soldiers bowed their heads in respect, knowing they had seen something holy. But the journey had taken its toll. Elizabeth's body grew weaker in the days that followed. Though her mission had succeeded, her strength was nearly gone. She had poured out everything: her love, her wisdom, and her very life for peace. Unknowingly, she had begun the final journey of her own. The queen, who had once ruled a kingdom, was now preparing to enter the kingdom of God. Chapter 9. Final Illness and Grace. After her final mission of peace at Estremoz, Elizabeth remained in the region to rest. Though the danger of war had passed, her body, long wearied by years of fasting, travel, and silent sacrifice, began to fail. She felt no fear, only a quiet sense of completion. For the first time, she no longer looked toward the next duty or journey. Instead, she turned inward, preparing her soul for the final pilgrimage, the return to the God she had served with every breath of her life. As her illness deepened, Elizabeth accepted each moment of pain with serenity. She saw suffering not as a curse, but as a final gift. One last chance to unite herself with the cross of Christ. Her physical weakness became an act of prayer. She did not ask for healing. Instead, she whispered psalms and offered her discomfort for the peace of others. Her heart, shaped by decades of mercy and silence, now beat in perfect harmony with surrender. Sensing the end was near, Elizabeth asked for the sacraments of the Church. She received Holy Communion with a radiant smile and confessed her sins with humility. Surrounded by Franciscan friars, she was anointed with the oil of the sick, her soul washed anew in grace. Those who witnessed it said her face glowed with a light not of this world. She was not slipping into death, she was walking toward life, toward the embrace of the eternal. News of her condition spread quickly. Soon, a crowd gathered quietly outside the convent in Estremoz. Nobles, peasants, priests, and even travelers came to pay their respects. Inside her room, the atmosphere was one of reverent stillness. She was surrounded not by fear, but by prayer. Loved ones held her hands, kissed her forehead, and wept softly. Yet Elizabeth herself remained calm, even joyful. Her peace was a testimony stronger than any sermon. Even in her final days, she continued to pray not for herself, but for others. She prayed for her son Afonso, for the unity of the Church, for the poor and the sick she had always served. Her intercessions were whispered, but full of fire. To the end, she remained a mother not just of a kingdom, but of countless souls in need of comfort. Her dying words were a litany of mercy, hope, and unshakable faith. To those nearest her, Elizabeth offered words that would live long after she was gone. Forgive freely, give without counting, love without fear. She left behind no treasure but her example, a life of humility, charity, and unwavering devotion. Her final hours were not filled with sorrow, but with gratitude. She had lived her call. She had given everything. Chapter 10. The Death of a Saint. On the 4th of July, 1336, Queen Elizabeth of Portugal passed away peacefully in Estremoz at the age of 65. Her final days had been marked by prayer, silence, and surrender. Those who surrounded her in her final moments, friars, attendants, and close companions, witnessed a death filled not with fear, but with serenity. Her face was calm, her hands folded in prayer, as if she had simply fallen asleep in the arms of her Lord. Word of her passing spread swiftly throughout the land. In towns and villages, church bells rang in mourning. People left their homes to kneel in the streets and offer prayers. Some wept openly, not just for the loss of a queen, but for the departure of a woman whose compassion had touched so many lives. Her death was felt like the dimming of a gentle light that had warmed the hearts of the poor and the forgotten. Her body was gently prepared for burial, and a solemn procession was arranged to carry her to Coimbra. There, at the monastery of Santa Clara, a convent she had long supported, she would be laid to rest. Along the journey, crowds gathered to pay their respects. Some brought flowers, others knelt in silence. All came with reverence. Her coffin was not adorned with excess, but with symbols of faith, humility, and peace. At the monastery, nuns and clergy welcomed her with chants and prayer. She was carried into the chapel she had so often visited in life, now as one of the faithful who had gone before. Her tomb was placed in a simple, prayerful space near the altar, where candles were lit and psalms were sung. There was no royal display, only the quiet reverence of those who recognized her holiness. People from all walks of life came to Coimbra to honor her. Some had once received bread from her hand, others had been moved by her example. They stood in long lines to kneel beside her resting place. Mothers carried children, the sick came in hope, soldiers bowed their heads. Elizabeth had become more than a queen. She had become a beloved presence in the hearts of her people. In the weeks after her death, Portugal entered a period of national mourning. Tributes were held in cities and churches across the country. Yet it was not the grand ceremonies that spoke loudest, it was the silent gratitude of the people she had served. Her name was spoken with affection, and her life remembered as one of quiet greatness. Elizabeth lived with deep faith, led with compassion, and passed away in quiet peace. Though her earthly journey ended, her memory lived on. For the people of Portugal, her death was not a farewell, but the beginning of a legacy, one rooted in love, humility, and holiness that would shine long after she was laid to rest. Chapter 11. Canonization and Legacy. Nearly 3 centuries after her death, the Church officially recognized what the people of Portugal had long believed. In the year 1625, Pope Urban VIII declared Elizabeth of Portugal a saint. Her canonization confirmed her life as a true model of Christian holiness, one marked not by royal conquests or grand miracles alone, but by quiet mercy, faithful service, and unwavering dedication to peace. Elizabeth was named the patron saint of peacemakers, a fitting title for the woman who had once stepped between armies and reconciled kings. Her example became a source of inspiration for those called to bridge divides, heal wounds, and foster forgiveness in a broken world. In her spirit of reconciliation, she continues to guide diplomats, leaders, and families seeking unity through compassion. Across Portugal and beyond, churches, monuments, and convents were dedicated in her honor. The monastery of Santa Clara in Coimbra, where she was laid to rest, became a site of pilgrimage. Statues of Elizabeth holding roses or standing between quarreling parties became familiar symbols of gentle strength. Artists depicted her with grace and serenity, often with a crown humbled by prayer, capturing the balance of nobility and holiness that defined her life. Her feast day was set on July 4th, the anniversary of her death. Each year, liturgical celebrations recall her legacy, inviting the faithful to imitate her virtues. In masses, prayers, and processions, people remember the Queen who fed the hungry, healed division, and lived simply for Christ. Her story continues to be read in churches and taught to children as a reminder that greatness lies in love. Elizabeth's legacy extends far beyond her homeland. She is remembered not only as a Portuguese monarch, but as a timeless example of Christian womanhood. She was a faithful wife despite trials, a devoted mother despite sorrow, and a servant leader in both palace and cloister. Her life speaks to women across generations who balance responsibility with faith, leadership with humility, and love with strength. Within the Church, she is honored not just as a queen, but as a saint for all people. Her influence has touched countless lives through intercession, through example, and through the quiet encouragement her story provides to those striving to live the gospel in ordinary circumstances. In her, the Church sees what it means to be holy in the world without being of it. Elizabeth of Portugal remains one of the most powerful yet humble figures in Christian history. Her throne was one of peace, her crown one of compassion. Her power lay not in command, but in conversion of hearts, of minds, and of lives. And through her example, the world continues to glimpse the beauty of a soul fully given to God. Chapter 12. Prayer to Saint Elizabeth of Portugal. The life of Saint Elizabeth of Portugal teaches us that holiness is found not in public glory, but in quiet faithfulness. As a queen, she could have chosen comfort and distance. Instead, she chose humility and service. As a wife, she endured sorrow with grace. As a mother, she became a bridge of peace between father and son. As a widow, she turned her life into a prayer. In every role, she lived the gospel not with words alone, but through action, sacrifice, and compassion. Her legacy invites us to become peacemakers in our own lives, to forgive where there is division, to serve where there is need, and to love without fear. She shows us that God's light shines brightest through gentleness, and that silent fidelity often speaks louder than power or position. In a world that still longs for justice, mercy, and unity, her witness remains as relevant as ever. Now, Let us pray with Saint Elizabeth of Portugal. O gentle and faithful Saint Elizabeth, you lived not for yourself, but for Christ and for others. In the grandeur of palaces and the quiet of cloisters, in royal robes and humble veils, you remained always a servant of peace and love. You bore burdens in silence, offered mercy where others judged, and transformed a throne into an altar of charity. Teach us, dear Saint, to love without limits, to forgive those who wound us, even when they do not ask, to comfort the forgotten, even when the world looks away, to be peacemakers, even in places where division seems unshakable. You gave bread to the hungry and roses in the chill of despair. You brought hope to the hearts the world had cast aside. Pray for us, that we may give not just from our excess, but from our very selves, that we may serve without seeking reward, and carry our daily crosses with the quiet strength you once showed. Intercede for our families, that love may triumph where anger has lingered. Intercede for our church and world, that leaders may seek justice, humility, and wisdom. Intercede for our own hearts, that we may hunger not for recognition, but for holiness rooted in compassion. O Queen of Peace, teach us to sanctify the ordinary, to speak healing words, to offer gentle hands, and to open our hearts to God's will in all things. Walk with us, Saint Elizabeth, in moments of trial and of joy, and lead us ever closer to the Sacred Heart of Christ, where true peace and everlasting love abide. Amen.